All right, and now let's cut across to our guest joining us, Salvatore Babonis, who is an associate professor at the University of Sydney in Australia. Professor, thanks so much for making time. Let me quickly come to you. We've heard the press conference that's come in. I'll come to you regarding the relevance of the Quad, because that involves Australia as well. But as of now, regarding Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Delhi, as of now, the key outcomes, we're still trying to get to the right lines from what were the key takeaways from that press conference. If you were able to go over the press conference or the highlights from it, anything that stood out for you?
I don't think there are key takeaways. I mean, if you look at the U.S. State Department website, this trip devotes about 12 lines to the trip to Sweden that immediately preceded the trip to India, only 4 lines about India, literally 30 words about Marco Rubio's trip to India. As for the Quad, I think they forgot entirely about it. It's not even mentioned from the U.S. side in the U.S. materials. So I don't think they put much thought into this trip. In fact, Marco Rubio specifically mentions in the State Department materials on this trip that he'll be going to Sweden for the Arctic 7 summit, and didn't even mention the Quad foreign ministers. So I think this trip has been an afterthought. I think that it was on the schedule. They had to go through with it. It's mainly focused on public diplomacy. Marco Rubio went around 4 cities in India. The ambassador commissioned a group of tuk-tuks, a group of auto rickshaws in Delhi to have American flags on them. That's actually what received most of the coverage in the U.S. media, were the American flags on the auto rickshaws, not anything about Marco Rubio's visit.
I hear you. Also, Professor, regarding Quad, where do you see this one going? And there is renewed mentions or repeated mentions now that we're hearing, since Marco Rubio is very much here, that is an alliance where India is very much part of it, Australia is too. As a grouping, what's the relevance, what's the aim, where does it head from here? Your take.
Notice that the repeated mentions repeatedly came from the Indian side until the U.S. side became aware that this was an issue for India and started repeating them. I mean, the New York Times has one paragraph about the Quad. It says, the secretary will meet not only with Indian officials, but also with the top diplomats from Japan and Australia who are flying to Delhi for a conclave next Tuesday of a partnership known as the Quad. In other words, they surmise that people won't even remember what it was. On top of that, they cite the Hindu as the source of the information that there will be a Quad summit, not the U.S. State Department. I'm here in Australia, where there's been no mention by the Foreign Ministry, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, that Foreign Minister Penny Wong will visit India. It's not on her travel agenda. It's not on the website. There's literally no mention in the Australian press. So I'm not sure that the U.S. and Australia even remembered that there was a Quad foreign ministers meeting that was supposed to happen. I mean, there's a war in Iran going on. There's a big budget fight going on in Australia. There's lots happening in the world. Japan's foreign minister's coming. There is literally a 14-word statement in English on the Japan Foreign Ministry website saying that he will be attending the Quad Foreign Ministers Summit. So I really think at this point, everyone's forgotten about it except for India.
All right. And let me now come to the Iran question. There have been statements coming in from the US, counter statements coming in from Iran, or parallel statements. They both are seeing these talks. They both say one thing in common, that we are going to be arriving at a conclusion. But everything apart from that seems completely divergent in opposite directions. One is saying that Strait of Hormuz will be rectified in some degree. Iran says Strait of Hormuz remains in our hold. Nuclear weapons will not be part of this discussion. Enrichment regarding their nuclear dust, as Trump calls it. Iran, there's no clarity on where that dust goes for the time that Iran is, they arrive at a deal. Too many divergences, not far from where we were earlier. Is there a deal?
Donald Trump is the president of a country that is democratic and conducts diplomacy in public. The Iranians come from a much more autocratic tradition and do diplomacy in private. And so Donald Trump is essentially airing his wish list more than he's airing a set of agreements. This is the U.S. negotiating position. And he has to make that public because he has a public to answer to, and he has a very aggressive media to answer to. So I don't think there's anything really to see in the fact that the two sides are talking past each other, because they're really talking to different audiences. When they talk to the press, they're not talking to each other in the press. press, they're talking primarily to the American voting public in the press, with Iranians trying to convince American voters just as much as Donald Trump is. So I wouldn't put much faith in, or I wouldn't put much stock in the different narratives coming out of U.S. and Iranian diplomats. Look, the fact is there's going to be an agreement at some point because the U.S. has a chokehold on Iran. And for whatever anyone may say that the U.S. has lost the war or that the U.S. is encountering problems, the only challenge for the U.S. is slightly higher gasoline prices. For Iran, this is an existential threat. Ultimately, Iran's going to give. The only question is when and maybe how much.
Also, on that point regarding the mediation process, let me get your take, Professor. There were claims from Iranian lawmaker who mentioned that Pakistan as a mediator is leaning more towards U.S. interests. And then there are reports coming out from the U.S. suggesting that Pakistan is giving safe haven to Iranian military aircraft. So both sides are kind of blaming the mediator of not doing a just job. Now, in the latest statement from Donald Trump, he mentions in the mediation process, he mentions the Gulf nations, he mentions Turkey, he mentions Jordan, he mentions, of course, all the Gulf nations that I mentioned. How do you assess Pakistan's role here? Are they reduced to just message delivery? Is there more?
Look, both sides are correct. Pakistan has nothing to gain from Iran and everything to gain from the U.S. So obviously, Pakistan is trying to get in the good graces or keep in the good graces of the Trump administration and gain benefits from the U.S. And thus, Iran, of course, will see that as some kind of betrayal, but that's inevitable. On the other hand, Pakistan has a long history of harboring enemies, not only of the United States, but enemies of even its own government on its territory, to say nothing of enemies of India and enemies of world peace. So the fact that Pakistan would play both sides is not at all surprising. Could the talks go to Turkey? I mean, certainly, President Erdogan would be thrilled to have the talks go to Turkey, but I don't think the mediator has much say in what's going to happen with the deal. Pakistan is simply a, so to speak, neutral territory on which to meet. It doesn't have any leverage in these talks, and neither would Turkey if it got involved.
Professor Sarwar, thanks so much for making time. Pleasure speaking with you. Would look forward to have you here with us in the WION studios in time to come. More to discuss. Speak with you again.
Take care.